any of that for you guys, let me know, because you won't have that when Crystal sends it out. So let me backpedal just a bit. Again, in the contextual tab that pops up when you're utilizing a pivot table, in the Analyze tab, the field headers and field lists are able to be collapsed and removed at will to remove some of those unwanted words up here. So that makes your table a little bit more presentable in that type of design. Forgotten. Wendy, don't forgive her too soon now. We have to hold her to that, okay? So are there any questions on kind of that exercise with non-numeric data? And again, you can change the aggregation type. Doesn't work too well with non-numeric data because, again, you can't sum or average things that are not numbers. So counting works specifically with non-numeric data more so than it does with anything else. So in this pivot table, we have counted by the states that are listed, the employee count for the fields that we have in this table. So as we can see very quickly, in Massachusetts, we have 43. In California, we have 44 females for a total of 108 with the 64 males. So you can really quickly analyze your data. And for all of the states listed, all 6 of the states listed, we have 176 females, 224 males, and of course 400 employees total, which we knew at the start of this exercise. Now, what I want to do is remove this and do something else. So for the second pivot table, I just want to show the distribution of counts. Now, distribution is kind of like a percent of total, or that's what I consider it as a data person, is when I want to see the distribution of these layouts, I'm asking for the percentages of a breakdown, right? So I'm going to do basically the same thing. I'm going to take the gender or sex and put it in the columns. I'm going to take the location and I'm going to put it in the row. I'm going to take the second instance of location again and put it down here in the values and make sure that it's summarizing by count. Okay. One other thing that I want to stop and point out is, again, at that drop-down menu in your value settings field, like some people like it to say count of location. You actually can change the name if you want to, like location by count. You can do count L, maybe you want to do abbreviation. So you actually can change that to whatever name, and when you hit OK, the title of that will change. So that's another functionality too. So I've built the same basic pivot table, but this time I want to do the second instance of the location. So I want to again take it down to the value. Okay, and again, notice it does count automatically, so I'm getting repeat numbers here. But here's the difference. That second location, I'm going to do the drop-down menu and I'm going to go to my value settings. And the first tab that you see summarize values. Okay, you're summarizing it by aggregating it, whether it's the sum, the count, the average, etc. But this other tab says to show the value as. So I'm going to show my value as a percent of the column total. So for the males, out of that 176 males, 5 is what percentage? Okay. Out of the total in California, out of that grand total of 176, what is 44 as a percentage, right? So I'm going to say show it as a percent of the column total. And when I hit OK, it will do that. All right. Now let's do it again. Let's do it as a percent of the grand total, right? So it's taking the not just breaking it down individually, it's going to do the grand total amount, right? So it's 44% here of the total grand total, right? So it's however your math wants to be, however you choose to do that. But again, you can change this to a distribution percentage and what the distribution of those counts are. So I'm going to go back again and change that to the percent of the column total. And I want to change it to percentage as my label. So again, I'm showing the count of female, the count of male, the total count of those, and each one is distributed per percentage of its column total. So a percentage of the Arizona males is 2.8%. And the females is 6.7, and that's a 5% total of the grand total here. Okay, so is everyone okay with distribution and percentages? Right, I don't see anything popping through on the chat. So that's a good sign. It's a very good sign. All right, so now I'm going to move to a concept called grouping. Okay, so I'm going to do a manual group, the manual group example here tab at the bottom. That's the next tab over from the employee list. And you can see I've kind of done the same thing with the Arizona. I've just taken the employee's name out. So in grouping, it's one of the very useful feature of pivot tables, and it allows you to combine items that you want to group into certain things. Okay, so the very first thing that I want to do is to build a pivot table from this chart. Get some coffee, excuse me. So again, we'll follow that same concept of inserting a pivot table. So I'm going to click anywhere in my data. I'm going to insert a pivot table. And as you guys know, I'm going to do an existing worksheet, and I'm going to just pop it into like column E, right? So you can see the whole thing, and I'll hit OK. And there's the start of my pivot table. So we practiced that a couple times. We should be good there. So I want to group these, as we saw on the previous pivot table, we had the list of the states, right? I want to group them by region. Okay, I want to focus on region. So I'm going to build this pivot table just like I did before. I'm going to take the sex and put it in the columns, the location and put it in the rows. Okay, so we build the same way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my function I taught you guys earlier in Excel. When you want to click on multiple things, you hold your control key down. So I want to group the Arizona, California, and Washington, which is over in the western part of the United States. I want that to be the western region. And then, of course, the New York, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts would be the eastern region, right? So western and region, western and eastern region. So I'm going to click on Arizona. I'm going to hold my control key down, and I'm going to click on California and Washington. And notice on my screen, you can see that all three have been selected. I'm going to right click on that selection, and I'm going to select this button that says group. Okay, now it looks a little wonky at first. We're going to fix that. So I'm going to undo that and do that one more time for you. Okay, so I want to group the states that are located in the western region versus the states that are located in the eastern region. So I'm going to click on Arizona. I'm going to hold my control key down, and I'm going to click on California, and then I'm going to go down here to Washington and click, and then I'm going to release my control key. As you can see, all three of those states are listed. I'm going to right click on that selection and then select group. And notice that it names it group 1, and it creates this as a group. Okay, now it also creates in your pivot table a location 2, because it's using some background like summations to make that grouping work. That's standard. Don't think it freaked out or done anything weird. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing with Massachusetts, New York, and Pennsylvania. I'm going to click on Massachusetts, hold down my control key and click on the New York and Pennsylvania, right click and select group. And now I have group 1 and group 2. Okay. So now I've grouped them the way that I want to group them. And again, notice that the second option for location appeared in those fields because it's using that to make the grouping work. It looks wonky, but it does not cause problems. All right, so I want to again remove these things that say column labels and row labels. So I'm going to click on the Analyze tab up here at the top and remove my field headers. And now, because I did the Western and Eastern region, I want to change the name of group 1 and group 2 to those names. So it's just like a pivot. It's like an Excel spreadsheet. Each one of these are in cells. So I just click on group 1. I go up to my formula bar up here, and I just type Western region. And I hit enter. Okay. And then I'll go do group 2. I'll type up here in my formula bar, Eastern region, and hit enter. And now I have those groupings. All right, now I also can move again the location down to the value section. We're doing those counts as we said before. You also can move another one down again and change that to a percent distribution of the total. Okay, let's do column total, hit OK. And now I have those distributions. I will remove the field list so you can see my pivot table being built. And of course, you're again able to change the names of these columns at will to whatever you choose. And now that is grouped by region. If I wanted to, well, I'll save that for more advanced. I had to think about that. Yep, let's not get too much in the weeds yet, Richard. I have so much fun with pivot tables. I have to bring myself back a little bit. Again, this is the grouping functionality. You click on the cells that you want. This works with any pivot table. If they're non-adjacent cells that are non-adjacent to each other, just hold your control key down. Make sure that you're selecting the cells you want. Right click and select group. If you make a mistake, you do know the shortcut of Control Z undoes something on your keyboard. If you hit Control Z, it will undo the last step. But again, if you don't know that trick, you can also hit the right click on the grouping and click ungroup, and it will ungroup those as you see fit. Okay, so correct your error, play around, do it again, undo it, and then you kind of realize where you want stuff to go. So are there any questions on grouping and ungrouping? All right, and I'm watching the chat box very intently. All right, so now the next thing I want to show you is what's called a frequency distribution. All right, most of us know what a frequency distribution is. It's just a graph to show you the distributions of things on a chart. That's the simplistic term of it. So in the example sheet called FREC-DIST, frequent distribution, I've created a sample fake data of students. There are 221 records of those students, and their grades or scores for the outcome of their tests, right? So in this example, what I want to see is I have 221 students. I want to see how many students are in each like percentile range, if like the grades. I want to see within 10 points where these student falls. So how many made from a 1 to a 10? How many made from a 91 to 100, right? I want to see how many of those students fall within those distribution ranges. It's very easy to do this. And I just want to kind of walk you through being able to do groupings if you're doing ranges. So a prime example for anyone in human services is the age range. If you want to see someone from 16 to 24, 25 to 34, etc., these are called frequency distributions. So what I'm going to do is, again, insert a regular pivot table into my spreadsheet. So anywhere in the data is where you're going to click, insert, and we're going to do a pivot table. And of course, I'm going to do it in my existing spreadsheet because I want you to see it. And I'll put it in cell D1 and pop the pivot table there. All right, so we've started our pivot table. Again, in our fields pane, it only lists the two columns that are in the chart, and that's students and scores. So I'm going to take the score field and put it in the row column. And remember, the rows go up and down, so vertically. So I want all of my scores to show up there so I can put them in distribution ranges, right? So I'm going to put my score into the rows. Okay, so as you'll see, all of them start flowing down. All right, now this is where some of that grouping comes in. All right, so we grouped non-numerical values before. When you're grouping numerical values, it allows you to group in ranges. So as you can see on my screen, it says, where do you start, where do you want to end, and how many do you want to put in them? Okay, so when you're working with value groupings as non-numeric groupings, so when we're working with text, it'll group whatever you select. If you're doing values, it's going to let you choose where to start, where to end, etc. So like a frequency distribution. So I'm going to right click on any of those values. It doesn't matter which one you choose. And I'm going to select group, and my grouping dialog box pops up. So I want to start at number 1, and I'll end at 100 because it's a score of 1 to 100. And I'm going to leave it at 10 because I want to create frequency distributions of 10. If you wanted to do distributions of 20, 25, 50, whatever you chose, you're able to do that. So I want it to start at 1. And again, what it's going to do, and you'll notice that this checkbox disappears. I'm going to show you why it does that. So I'm going to start it at 1, end at 100, and group by tens. When I click OK, my distributions are created. Okay, the 1 checkbox disappeared because it's telling you there's no grade range in 1, right? So Excel is trying to help you. So if you'll notice, if I start it, leave it at 27 or 21, it'll do it because there are scores of that. But I don't like Excel telling me what to do, so I put 1 anyway. All right, so it takes it away just because there is no 1 score. The lowest score is like 21, right? So now I'm going to take their score and I'm going to drop it into the field, the value field, because now I want it to aggregate data. And now you can see that there are these many distributions in the score ranges. So there are 3 individuals who scored between a 21 and a 37. And there are 84 individuals that scored an 81 to a 90. Now, if you really want to have fun, I got a question. So Crystal's giving you a tip. I'm going to read it out. Anyone who wants to make your screen bigger, I can actually do a little bit of it on my end. Does that help you guys a little bit? Okay. You'll go to the top right and click view. And on the drop down menu, you will choose full screen. So again, if you want your screen to be bigger, more than I can do, go to the top right and click view. And on your drop down screen, choose full screen. So if you really want to have fun with it, inside this pivot table in my Analyze tab, you can actually create a pivot chart. Okay, so if I'm inside of my pivot table, she said my old eyes are happy. Wendy, I'm going to need you to help me out in these classes and not make me laugh in the middle. Oh, this is so much fun. I love doing this for y'all. So inside of my pivot table, you have the option to do a chart, just like you do in any Excel graphic. So if we insert a pivot chart, it will recommend a cluster chart because again, it's a frequency distribution. So a bar graph or a column chart is perfect for that. And so if you click it and hit OK, it will also insert a frequency distribution pivot chart. And you have the option of filtering this chart by your selections. You also have the ability to change what count it is if you change your pivot table, and you have the ability to manipulate this chart just like you do any other chart inside of Excel. Just because it's a pivot chart, it gives it a little bit more of a different functionality, but the formatting completely works. So if I wanted to take the title out, I could. You know, I don't have to put total in my range because you can see the distribution ranges, and it will again calculate that for you. So you do have the ability to do the chart graphic as well as the table graphic. And I'm going to move this down just a bit for a second. And again, in your pivot chart, I'm going to bring back my field list so you guys can see it. I can take that score down here again to the bottom. And again, do that show value as a percentage of the column total. And again, you get the frequency distribution of the percentages of students in that range. Again, that's just a totally different graphic. I won't go into how to analyze that here because we can, but that's a little bit more informative because we're adding another series to the chart. But I just wanted to show you that you can add charts inside your pivot table, from your pivot table, as well as adding a pivot table from your graph. So it's just kind of an extra bump in it if you wanted to do that. Does everybody understand the grouping of numeric numbers as a frequency distribution, and it's counting those, or whatever we choose? Okay. All right. Boy, this one's moving faster than I thought. I'm a liking. Okay, so the last thing that I had planned for today was to show you what the functionality of calculated fields and calculated items in a spreadsheet. Again, I can get a little bit more in depth in that when we do an advanced pivot table course, possibly in October, or through questions of you reaching out to me. But perhaps the most confusing part of a pivot table is the calculated fields versus the calculated items and how they work inside of a pivot table. So many pivot tables users who are familiar with what we've done and can play around with data shy away and avoid dealing with calculated fields because they're a little bit more in depth. So let's just talk about a few definitions, okay? So a calculated field is a new field that you create from other fields in your pivot table. All right, so think about the name, calculated field. It is a new field in your table that is created from other fields in your table. Okay, if your pivot table source is a worksheet table, an alternative to using a calculated field is to add a new column to the table and just create a formula, right? But the calculated fields reside in the value section of a pivot table because they are calculated fields. Notice the name. And you'll notice in a pivot table that the values field is the value that has the calculation on it. These do not have calculations. So if you do create a calculated field, be mindful that that field that is created must be placed in the value section and aggregated at will by your choice of whether you want to be sum, odd, everything. You want to make sure that that is used in the value field because it will not work in other fields. Okay, so again, a calculated field is just a new field created from other fields, and it must reside in the values area. A calculated item uses the context of other items within a field of the pivot table. So an alternative to that is to insert more rows and write a formula in your table. But to do an item, it's the contents of other items within a field of the pivot table. So I'm going to give you some examples so you can get it. The formulas used to create calculated fields and calculated items are not standard Excel formulas. So in other words, you don't enter the formulas into cells, right? As you're familiar in working with spreadsheets, you just enter the formula here and say equals this times this, whatever, right? So in pivot tables, you do not enter the formulas inside of the cells of a pivot table, right? You enter these formulas into a dialog box and they're stored in the background data of the pivot table, okay? So that's the difference. Think of it as a data model. This is where it gets a little bit more advanced. It's not within the pivot table, it is within the model of the pivot table. This is why you don't enter it into a cell, you enter it into a dialog box so it's stored within the data. So that's kind of just what I want to leave you with before we talk about this table. So the table that I've created for you on this exercise is it consists of 5 columns: sales rep, region, month, sales, and units sold. And it just has 48 rows of data dealing with monthly sales information for that particular sales representative. Okay, very simple. So I would like to create a calculated field from a pivot table. And I'm going to pop up another screen here. So we're going to start from scratch, and we're going to develop this pivot table to calculate average sales per unit. Okay, so I want the average sales. So I'm going to aggregate the data for sales representative, but then I want to see the average sales of that particular person. Okay, so we're going to start, and I'm changing my screen because my screens are getting full. So I'm going to start by just building a simple pivot table as we've done before. So again, we're going to click anywhere in our data. We're going to insert a pivot table, and I'm going to insert it into this spreadsheet, the existing spreadsheet, and I'll just pop it right here in G1 or G2. Let's do G1. All right, and I'll hit OK. So this is the start of my pivot table. I'm just gonna, let's just say I want to do the total sales by month for each sales representative, okay? So I'm gonna put the sales rep on the column so it goes across the top, and then the months on the rows, right? Because it's a little bit elongated. So that's just in my mind what I want it to look like. So I'm gonna do sales rep onto the columns and the month onto the rows. Okay, so I'm going to scroll over just a little bit so you can start seeing this. All right, and scroll over just a bit, and there we got it. Okay, so again, I just took the sales rep and put it on the top, and then I'm going to remove the field headers, okay, because I don't need them right now, and the months on the left, okay. And now I want to see what their sum of their sales are for each of those months, right? So I'm just going to take the sales data, drop it in the value section, and again, it's already sum of sales, so we're good. I'm just going to widen this a bit so you can see it a little bit better. All right, and I may not get it exactly the same width, but I just want kind of to show you that data. All right, so we've built the basic chart to now do what we want to do with this Excel, this calculated column, okay? So from their sales, right? So Amy, for the month of January, sold a little over $23,000. All right, that's awesome. But what if I want to know her average sale, right? Average sale per unit. I need to insert a calculated field because average sales is not calculated in this pivot table. There's nothing on my table to calculate that value, right? So I'm going to insert this into the dialog box and create that calculated field. So to compute an average sale amount, the formula would be you take the sales and you divide it by the units sold, okay? Then it gives you your average. So I'm going to select any cell in the pivot table. I'm going to go up to my Analyzing tab, and in that tab right below that is a calculation section. Okay, I'm going to click on Fields, Items, and Sets command button, and you'll have the option of Calculated Field. All right, so let me do that one more time. So anywhere in your pivot table on the Analyze Contextual tab, in the Calculation section, Field Items and Sets, and then you have a Calculated Field option. Your Calculated Field dialog box will come up, and this is where we start creating that calculated field. So first we want to give it a name, right? Well, my name would be average unit price. All right, so that's what I'm doing, average unit price. Next is, what is the formula? How do you calculate this? All right, so every formula starts with, anybody remember?
Equals.
Yes. So again, every formula starts with equals, and then we could just put in the field, right? This is the fun part of working with a pivot table, is we're writing a calculated field. So we're going to take other fields to create this calculated field. So it's going to be sales. So I can double click sales or hit insert field and it goes up here. So it's equals sales. The division symbol is the /, and then I double click units sold or select it and hit insert field. So it's sales divided by units sold. And when I hit OK, now I have the average over here. You see the average? So the average unit price, I'm just going to change this to an average, and you've got $96 is her average unit price for that. Isn't that awesome? And you actually can change the name here to make it smaller. So I'll just do av price. And now they come a little bit closer. Okay. Do I need to repeat any of that for you to see it. So again, we've got the average price for every single sales rep and the average price for the grand total. So we can see that in the month of March, that March and April looks like that's a huge sales quarter for us. Okay, that's pretty good analytics as we delve a little bit deeper into all of that. So again, to create a calculated field, do I need to repeat any of that? I see Crystal's face. You can't hide on Zoom, Crystal. So, all right, so here's what we'll do. We'll start it fresh, okay? I'll insert that pivot table real quick. All right. All right, I'm just going to do column. Oh, sorry, rows. All right, and then the sum. All right. All right, so now we've got my basic pivot table here, right? So again, to do a calculated field, all right, to calculate a field, what that definition is it as a field that is created from other fields in your pivot table, okay? So I'm going to click anywhere in my pivot table, and I'm going to go up to my Analyze tab, to my Calculation section, and select the Field Items and Sets command button, right? And that will allow me to create a calculated field. All right, so based on the definition, it's a field that is created from other fields in the pivot table. So you just name it, and I'm going to name it average unit price. All right, and then I'll do a formula. We know that formulas begin with equals. So my formula for average price is you take the sales and you divide it by the unit sold. So I'm going to do sales, insert field, the division symbol, and units sold, insert field. So now that creates my formula. And then I'm going to hit OK. All right, so now, as you can see, we have the sum of average unit price. Well, I don't want it to sum. I want to make sure that that is the average of the average unit price. So I'm going to just leave it as an average here. And now it's the average of the average unit price, which is what it is. And then I can change that name to make my table work a little bit better right here. So I'm just going to put AVG price. Okay. All right. Now I'm trying to think of how I can do this one. So now I want to do a calculated items for commissions earned on their quarter sales, right? So quarters of January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, right? So I want to create 4 calculated items to represent the commission earned on those quarterly sales according to this schedule. So we've got January, February, March sales is 10%. And we'll do quarter 2, 3, and 4 too. Okay, so we'll just do 1 quarter right now to get a basis. All right, so I want to go up here to where my row labels are. All right, so up here where the row labels are, and I'm going to choose in the pivot tables analysis tool, and I don't know why it's being evil to me. It won't let me do it. Okay, so in my row labels or my column labels, either one. So in my row labels, go up here to fields, same path as we did calculated field, but this time it's going to be calculated item. All right. Oh, it don't like me. I'm going to trick it. Let me trick it. Fine. Let me trick it. All right. So I'm going to move it back to sum so it'll let me trick it. Sorry, all right, so we're going to click on it again and do calculated item. Here we go. All right, so in calculated items, all right, I want to enter the name for the new item. So I'm going to go quarter 1 commission. Okay, so that's what it is. Then again, we're going to enter a field, a formula for that item. And again, quarter one commission is 10% of whatever your January, February, March sales is, right? So we're going to enter the formula for that. So I'm going to open parentheses, 10%, the multiplication symbol, which is the asterisk. All right. And actually, I'm going to put my open parentheses here. All right. So it's 10% times January plus February plus March. Close parentheses. So what, remember in our formulas class, when you put parentheses around something, it does that first and then outside of it, right? So it's going to take January, February, March sales, add them together, and then multiply that sum by 10%. Okay. And I'm going to hit OK. And you have a quarter one commission down here. We can do the exact same thing again for the next quarter. So let's say we do quarter two commission. And this time we'll say it's 11%, right? 11% times April, May, and June. Close parentheses. All right. And then we'll hit OK. And there's your quarter two commissions. All right. So we can continue doing that for every quarter. And you can take these and group them into the commissions. So you can do your grouping, right click on them and group them together, right? And then we'll remove grouping for the other ones, but you'll have your commissions down here. And then we'll format some other stuff up here. So again, you can play around with it, but I want you to get the basis for doing a calculated field versus a calculated item. So notice that each one of these months is an item on your table, right? So you're just adding the item of quarter commissions. But when you did the average price, that was a complete column that was calculating things in your spreadsheet. So that's the difference. The calculated field runs through the whole thing. The calculated items just adds another item on your rows list, and you're able to group those and grand total them or whatever you choose to do based on whatever your calculations are. Okay. So now I do plan to instruct a third pivot tables that will go into a little bit more of that formula writing for calculated pivot tables, and it'll go into more in-depth distribution schedules, all of that, the pivot table sums and counts. But that again, that leaves us to about 10 minutes for questions, comments, etc. It went a little bit faster than I planned this time. You guys either didn't have questions or your mind is blown and you don't want to talk to me. One of the two. But again, that went a little bit faster. So I don't have anything else on my end as far as instruction, but are there any questions, comments, things that maybe you want to review again before we end? Anything to that effect? Wow. All of us are quiet today. I'm gonna spell check myself before I wreck myself. I don't see anything on the chat. Okay. All right. Steve, are you grabbing another cup of coffee? All right. Well, I'm good on my end. Again, I will plug for the consortium to fill out those surveys, because that again is going to lead us into future classes of what you guys want. The other thing is that in case you do not know what Canva is or Jotform, Canva is a matter of fact, Crystal, you can stop recording. I'm completely done. I promise.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm completely done. I'm going to take a